our guest today. My name is Erin Corcoran, and I am the director of the Social Justice Institute here at the University of New Hampshire School of Law. And I have the great privilege today of kicking off this event. Senator Bob Kerrey is here at the law school, which we are very excited about. And he, in putting this program together for today, I asked him sort of what would he like or how would he envision this program. And what he really wanted this to be is a conversation between him and you, and he also wanted the dean to participate as well. So we're going to have a few remarks from him, but this should be your opportunity to ask questions, to take advantage of the fact that we have him here in the room, we are really happy at the law school to be co-sponsoring this event with the Concord Coalition, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Bob Bixby, who's the executive director of the Concord Coalition, to tell you a little bit about their work with Senator Kerrey, and introduce him formally to you all. So thank you very much, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Erin, and thank you to the University Law School for hosting us again here. I have the great privilege of introducing our co-chair, Bob Kerrey. The Democratic co-chair, or Republican co-chair, is Warren Rudman. And I've had the great privilege of being with the Concord Coalition since it started in 1992 and working with some extraordinary former United States senators such as Paul Tsongas, Sam Nunn, Warren Rudman, and now Bob Kerrey. Warren Rudman, of course, likes to joke that he's outlasted 3 Democratic co-chairs, and so he is truly one of our great heroes. Bob Kerrey served as governor of his home state of Nebraska, 2 terms in the United States Senate, Medal of Honor winner. To me, he won his Medal of Honor for service in Vietnam, but I think of it more as that he should get a Medal of Honor for his work on fiscal issues in the United States Senate. People may not remember, but he was co-chair, of course, of the Kerrey-Danforth Commission back in the mid-90s. And the Kerrey-Danforth Commission established the premise that current fiscal policy is unsustainable. And so that's about as far as we've gotten since then, but it established the premise, and now we just have to figure out what to do about it. And that's kind of what today's discussion may get at a little bit, that intersection between taking an unsustainable problem, a dysfunctional political system, and making something work out of that. And I get to just turn the thing over here to Bob Kerrey and Dean Broderick for their thoughts on that, and bring you into the discussion later. So thanks, and let's get started.
You going first?
Not with you, Senator. You're going first.
First of all, it's nice to be back in New Hampshire and not be a presidential candidate. Although it's nice to see, Will and Danny and others, and John and Mary, and it is nice. I mean, one of the things for those of you who have not been involved with politics, that's hard to imagine living in New Hampshire and not getting involved with politics. Among the things that oftentimes gets missed, especially as more and more cynicism gets injected into discussions about politics, is that campaigns allow people to come together and become friends. And very often, and I heard it today at lunch, people telling stories about Warren Rudman, about when he decided he's going to run for Senate in 1980, and you become friends from getting engaged in a campaign. Young people get responsibilities way beyond what they're apt to get at a very early age. And oftentimes you become friends with people that are working for your opponent. And it's quite remarkable, and oftentimes gets missed, as I said, as more and more citizenship gets injected into politics. It really is a worthwhile endeavor. And not even before you get to what the laws can do, what the laws can do for human beings. In '92, as those of you who are old enough to remember, the man who won New Hampshire, Paul Tsongas, former senator from Massachusetts, and Paul started off with a simple message of asking people, do you want to be a patriot, a new American patriot for fiscal matters. He was concerned about the economic future of the country, and I think I get the language wrong, but it was a call to be patriotic. And it's the kind of patriotism that I admire. I've listened at times to people to get patriotic, particularly when it comes to military matters, and I'm generally quite skeptical of that kind of rhetoric, because it oftentimes covers up what actually goes on when men now and men and women engage in combat. So patriotism typically is used to rally people to a military cause, and what Paul was doing is rallying people to a different kind of cause, to an economic cause. And after he lost, both he and I lost to not only an extraordinary man, but an extraordinary politician who really had figured out what he wanted to do if he was elected. Paul got a call, I believe, from Pete Peterson, and the Concord Coalition was born. And Paul actually used the same images that the Concord Coalition does today. So the Concord Coalition really is an extension of the message that Paul Tsongas was carrying in 1992, which is that it does require the same sort of attitude of patriotism, where the expectation is you're going to give a little, not just get a little. On the way up here, Aaron was describing being a part of naturalization ceremony. He said one of the things she does for her law school students is requires them to take the same test that naturalized citizens have to take, and is surprised how few, if any, of them actually pass it. And those of us who are in a situation where our mothers did all the work to make us citizens, as is the case with me, oftentimes don't appreciate what we have to do. We didn't have to give much to become citizens of anything. So that same attitude is going to be required. You can't do it any other way. You cannot fix the current economic problem, especially if you want to do it in a way that strikes some resemblance to fairness. You can't do it. You simply can't if it's just about taking care of you right now in this particular moment. I moderated a panel with Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson a few months ago. They did the debt commission for President Obama. And Erskine can drop down in that North Carolina accent about any time he wants to. So in the Q&A, somebody asked him a question. He said, well, he says, he said, let me describe the problem this way. He says, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a treaty with Taiwan. And the terms and conditions of that treaty is that if China invades Taiwan, we got to go to war to defend Taiwan. The problem is we've got to borrow the money from the Chinese in order to do it. And Simpson tells a remarkable story that as a Democrat, we Democrats didn't give him near enough credit. George Herbert Walker Bush was a patriot in 1990. He said, I understand what I said at the Republican convention, no new taxes, read my lips, but you're not going to fix this thing with voodoo economics. And I'll support a budget bill, he said, coming out of a budget summit that has tax increases so long as the Democrats will agree to spending restraint. And Alan says, I voted for that bill. He didn't vote for the one in 93, I pointed out to him, but he voted for the one in 1990. And he goes back to Cody, Wyoming, and a man walks up to him on the street. He says, Senator, he said, I've always supported you. Always supported you. I like what you stand for. I like what you're trying to get done. But after that budget vote, I wouldn't vote for you again if you were Jesus Christ. And Alan says, I looked down on him and I said, buddy, if I was Jesus Christ, I wouldn't be representing Wyoming. And the point of that story is, you can't solve this problem without making somebody mad at you. You just can't. Somebody's going to get mad at you. And in the modern political environment, if you can't, if you haven't got somebody that you can blame for the problem, oftentimes it's hard to solve. And the particular problem that we've got today, I hate to say it to all my New Hampshire supporters that were getting tired of me answering every single question with something having to do with health care, but you can't do it without doing health care. You can't. It's the biggest part of the problem. And unless you get in and face that one, all the rest of it is basically going to be rounding errors. And in fact, with the commission that Jack Danforth and I did in 1994, and I don't know how many of you remember 1994. It wasn't a great year to run as a Democrat. And I was up for re-election in Nebraska and won re-election, taking the results of that entitlement commission, saying this is what we have to do. So I completely reject the idea, and I appreciate the technology's changed things. I remember Jerry Brown was really considered to be a technological wizard because he was holding in 1992 a 1-800 number up in the debate. So I understand technology has changed it, but I don't think it's changed it so much that people aren't willing to take the truth, and especially if I think some standard of fairness is applied to whatever that solution is. I think the American people are ready for it. It gets harder and harder because I think part of the problem is we keep giving standing ovations to the wrong things. I required a new simple rule. I think anything that produces a standing ovation should never be converted into a law. It's a bad idea. So anyway, I think the Concord Coalition has done a very good job of framing the problem, and I'm hopeful, though the hope doesn't derive from the presidential debates. I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to solve the problem, but a lot of it's going to begin with us. We've got to give the political leadership the message that we understand there's no easy answer here. We're not going to get out of the thing with following the easy path, because the easy path is, I think, going to lead to not only generalized weakness of the country, but I think it's going to lead to generalized unfairness as well. So that's my pitch. That's my story, and I'm sticking with it. Yeah. John?
Yeah,
and what do you think?
Yeah, let me just say, my mother would be pretty proud. I want to thank Senator Kerrey, obviously, for being here. Now I know what Phil Mickelson's caddy must feel like after a round of golf. I just want to tell you a very brief story. It was funny to me, more embarrassing than funny, I think. I went on the court in 1995, and I loved government and politics and admired those who were in the public forum. And so there I was in this reclusive world, wondering at times whether I made the right choice. And so one day I came out of the conference room, and the woman in the front office said, "Do you know a Bob Kerrey?" My neighbor, by the way, was Bob Kerrey. And I said, "Yeah, he's my neighbor. I know Bob Kerrey very well." She said, "He's on the phone for you." I said, "Gee, it's not like Bob to call me. I hope everything's okay in the neighborhood." So I went to my office, I took my robe off, and I sat down. And I heard a voice that it wasn't the Bob Kerrey I knew. It was the other Bob Kerrey. And then I thought, oh my God, he's called the wrong number. And I said, he said, "You're probably wondering why I'm calling you." I said, "Yes, I am, Senator. That's true. I am wondering why you're calling me." He said, "Well, I'll get right to the point. I'm the head of the Senate Campaign Committee. I'm calling to offer you $1 million if you'll run for the United States Senate." And I thought, oh my God, how embarrassing. He doesn't know I'm a judge. So I said, "Senator, I'm on the court now." He said, "I know where you are. I'm talking about where I'd like you to go." And then when I saw him in New York some years later, this past summer, he said, "I bet you wish you took that $1 million." I said, there were days, I'll tell you that. I don't have nearly as much to add, obviously, as Senator Kerrey, but let me just make this preliminary observation, obviously without his credentials. Largely based on the fact that I'm 64 years old, so I've lived enough life to have seen some things and have been blessed enough to know people who have made a difference. One of those people is Senator Kerrey. And my statement is not a political statement, even though I'm a lifelong Democrat, but it's not political. The problem with the United States, at least in terms of its leadership, generally, is unrecognizable to me and to most Americans. I don't ever remember it like this. It wasn't the America my parents taught me about. It wasn't the America I got interested in high school or in college. It wasn't what inspired me to be a lawyer. And for 15 years, I was out of the arena because I had to be. And I saw it morphing and changing in ways that I found very threatening to American life. When I think of the people who served in the United States Senate when Senator Kerrey arrived, And I think that the people, although there are some good people, trust me, I know that. But broadly speaking, you look at the people serving there now, if you hold those pictures one to the other, you'd probably wonder what had happened. In my pre-judicial life, I was a trial lawyer, and I had great trust in citizens. Juries are pretty smart. Most of the problems confronting the United States, from health care to deficit to foreign policy, could be solved randomly by 12 people selected from a box in Hillsborough County North, who didn't have their egos invested, who didn't have a predetermined result, and were willing to make compromises. Otherwise, there'd never be a jury verdict issued in America. The American people are smarter than the people that are currently serving them in many positions. And what I take from it is not that, therefore, we can't do anything about it, but that the voices at the margins, left and right, will not solve the problem. As I always say to people, thank God for Ohio and Michigan and Indiana, because they seem to get it at some level. And America needs to go there. But mostly it needs people who are willing to take us there. I always admired Senator Kerrey, not to embarrass him, because he spoke his mind. He spoke it civilly. He spoke it on reflection. And even though he's now not currently in the U.S. Senate, he continues to serve the United States. I think he was on the 9/11 Commission. I mean, it's that level of public service, that disinterested in terms of self-interest public service, is getting very scarce in America. And you know whose fault that is? Our fault. It's our fault. And so if the American people are unhappy with what's happening, either in the Congress or outside the Congress, it's our fault. And so it seems to me the challenge is to find ways for the American people to engage. And I don't pretend to be an economist, but I do know this. You can't have a ratio of debt to GDP that we have now and think the country's going to recover. You can't have the country without revenue and think it's going to recover. You can't expect that the social contracts in America do not have to be reorganized and modified in America to fix it. To fix it. Not to win, because nobody can win this fight. But it needs to be fixed by people of goodwill who are willing to compromise. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Anybody have any questions out there? Yes, sir. I'll repeat it.
You can use the mic just for the recording.
Both of you have touched on very significant problems that our political and social lives face. And I'd be interested in both of your reactions to the recent Supreme Court case, which in my opinion has knocked the hell out of any potential political candidate, whether it's running for president or running for a local state senator or something along that line. And
Talk about Citizens United?
Right.
Well, it's, I mean, I've actually read the opinion. The argument is that basically a corporation and individual are the same, and so it's from that standpoint, the argument kind of makes sense, you know. But the court, I think, mistakenly believed that transparency would solve the problem, and there isn't transparency. So you hear the word transparent is, I think, maybe half a dozen times in that opinion, in the majority opinion. So, first of all, making the system more transparent will, maybe, I don't know, maybe solve 30 or 40% of it, maybe 20% of it. I'm looking for John to nod his head up and down, John Rao, who has persuaded me to, myself and Warren and Alan Simpson and Bill Bradley, to be part of a nationwide effort to change the federal law to bring public financing into campaigns for Congress. But it's a game changer, and I would say mostly for the bad. The senior Senator Ben Nelson from Nebraska announced late December he wasn't going to run for re-election, and I came closer to saying yes than I thought I was going to. I've been married for 11 years, and I learned that there's times you got to think like a husband, not like a man. And so I felt like a husband, said no, but it was harder than I thought. And when I was out in Nebraska, I experienced this Citizens United decision because the Koch brothers and Karl Rove ran ads against me. But I was just, I was coming home to visit my kids. I didn't think it was that big a deal. But they spent about $300,000, which is a lot of money in Nebraska. I mean, it'll buy you almost 3,000 gross rating points, which is a unit of measure for those of us who have run. It's a lot of money. Anyway, so people said, well, did that cause you to say no? I said no, because my name identification in the state's almost 90%, and people know who I am. But if they didn't know who I was, and then they'd spent $300,000 calling me whatever it was, carpetbagger was what they called me. That's not as bad as they would have called me if I had been a candidate. So if you've never run before, it'd be a tremendous barrier, because that advertisement will brand you if nobody knows you. And the next thing you know, the rest of your life, people are saying, "Oh, you're the guy who shoplifted." I knew that. They run an ad saying I shoplifted, but I didn't shoplift. Well, as far as the public knows, they just saw or heard an advertisement, and so it's a tremendous barrier for the uninitiated, the unknown individual. Secondly, it's real money. I mean, 800,000 people will vote in the general election this fall in Nebraska, and the guy who managed my campaign in '94 and in '88, he was prepared to manage it again if I had said yes. Estimated it was going to cost $25 million. My side. So $25 million. I said, geez, that's a lot of money. He said, well, fortunately, 15 of it is going to be through a super PAC. So $15 million is funded through anonymous sources, through super PACs, in this case, promoting independent of me. Well, it's not independent of me. It's done for the purpose of electing me. On the other side, done for the purpose of defeating. So the organizing principles of politics in America, I believe X, Y, and Z, and I joined the Democratic Party. I believe A, B, and C, and I become a Republican. Those organizing principles are becoming less and less important because these people who are trying either to win the majority or to hold on to the majority, that's their only objective. They're not looking at the Democratic or Republican platform. They're just trying to win the majority. So it's a big problem. I think it's a dramatic change in politics in America, and it will, I think, raise the barrier even higher for individuals who are not well known to become candidates. And I think it's going to make the political parties, therefore, the beliefs that people have about what ought to be done or not ought to be done, a lot less important. So I would very much like to see either another justice get appointed to overturn it, or see the law change to modify it, especially to get more transparency into the system. But it's a big change.
I was just going to add that I obviously transparency in public financing would be huge, but in some ways, there's a tendency to idealize America. A lot of these decisions used to be made in back rooms, smoky back rooms. Women didn't vote. I mean, we were part of American history, and we did okay. We weren't the America we should have been. The answer to this problem is, I think, what Senator Kerrey said. When Governor Clinton came to New Hampshire in October of 1991, he had 3% name recognition, not 3% favorable, 3% name recognition. In this world, he might have gotten it to 4%. But I'm still naive enough to think that politics is still about ideas. And a good example of that, even though I'm not sure I agree with the ideas, but take a look at the current campaign for the presidency in the Republican primary. Rick Santorum has been a stepchild. I mean, the fact that he's still alive is extraordinary. Mitt Romney had so much more money, so many more endorsers, so much greater an organization. Rick Santorum right today is beating him. And he's proud that he raised $1 million last week, which is a lot of money, but it's not Citizens United money. But in the run-of-the-mill, ordinary campaign, money governs. One of the things that I think is sad, and it's not really a Citizens United problem, is demonstrated when you watch on television a nomination for the Supreme Court of the United States. It's not about the nominee these days. One side or the other knows that he or she will get confirmed. It's about auditioning for the money at the back of the room. It's about the agendas left and right that bring in the contributions. That's not good for American life. But again, I go back to what I said earlier. There are a lot of reasons why things don't work right, but there is no reason why, if the American people decided that wasn't working and they were going to trump it with their vote and their involvement and their engagement, they could trump it. As hard as it would be to do it. But people don't, they don't, whether they're defeated, whether they feel their voice doesn't matter, which I suspect is true. It could still be fixed. I don't know when the global fix will come, if it ever will. But if Rick Santorum believed what you and I believe, he'd never run for the presidency of the United States because he couldn't raise any money. He may get the Republican nomination for the presidency in a world that's awash with money, and he has captured people, or some segment of them, with his ideas. Pretty impressive what he's done, whether you agree with him or not. Pretty impressive.
Well, he's also captured the attention of a few fat cats that throw money into a super PAC too. So, I mean, he's not completely free of that super PAC influence. And look, the greatest source of my enthusiasm about the future of this country comes both from our accomplishments in the past. I mean, I graduated from, when I got out of, actually got out of college. I got out of college in 1965. You know, the Cold War is still going on. That was the year Voting Rights Act was passed. And all through that era, my formative years, people were dying on both sides of the civil rights debate, dying on both sides of the Vietnam War debate. It was a terrible time. You wonder whether the country's going to survive it. But we did, and we actually made extraordinary bipartisan accomplishment to make peace with Vietnam, create a normalization process that George Bush started and Bill Clinton finished, and it was a pretty phenomenal foreign policy success. So I watch young people today, and they're color blind, they're gender blind, they're international. It's a great source of hope. However, because they don't vote, they're basically in the fiscal debate. They're getting hosed. You watch all the presidential candidates, the current president himself included. You would think that people over the age of 65 are getting the short end of the stick. And they aren't. We're not. I'm 68. We're not getting the short end of the stick. And in fact, we should look going forward. There's in excess, I think, we're looking for Bob Bixby to confirm my number, but it's $30 trillion unfunded liability for Social Security and Medicare. It's the fastest growing, Medicare in particular, is the fastest growing part of the budget. And you got to face that fact. I mean, in the midterm election, the Republican candidates in the House didn't attack the Affordable Health Care Act because it had a health insurance mandate. They attacked it because it had $500 billion over 10 years of savings in Medicare, and won a 22-point margin with voters over the age of 65 who vote over 70%. They went right, and you hear on the Republican side, President Obama cut $500 billion out of Medicare and all restored. I mean, you think, my God, how are we going to get out of this? If we continue this charade that basically is going to, I think, it's going to hose people that are under the age of 30. At a time, you've got this I would say this almost violent internationalization of our economy. I mean, the impact. I mean, I say, well, the market's going to solve it. Jesus, I mean, I'm a business guy and I believe in the marketplace, but man, the marketplace, well, it doesn't have a heart. It doesn't give a damn if you've got a job or not. It doesn't care whether you got health care or not. It doesn't make a moral judgment. It doesn't. It produces high quality, it generates lots of wealth, it does really good things. But the facts are, you got 7 billion people living on planet Earth. We got 3 billion jobs, 3 billion people who want jobs, and 1.8 billion jobs available. We're 1.2 billion short. And we got a lot of people out there willing to work that aren't working. And they're all over the planet. They're not just in New Hampshire. They're all over the darn planet. And it puts tremendous pressure on young people. And so what are they doing? They're delaying marriage. They're living with their parents. They're not buying homes. You know, it's not surprising what's going on. And so it seems to me that when I talk about having the courage to solve the budget problem, yeah, there's some things that are going to be unpopular. But the question is, what are our priorities? Do we really care about our kids and our grandkids? Or is it just political mumbo jumbo? Is it another applause line? Is that all it is? And it's not hard to figure out if that's all it is. If you're one of the people who are co-sponsors of the Do Nothing plan when it comes to Social Security, and you know we have 535 members of Congress, you know how many people are co-sponsoring something that will fix that problem? 0. That means there's 535 co-sponsors of the Do Nothing plan. And you know what the consequences of the Do Nothing plan are for people that are under the age of 30? They're going to have a 25% increase in their taxes and a 30% cut in their benefits. Now, is that fair? The answer is no, it's not fair. But that's current law. That's the Do Nothing plan. We got to stop this charade, it seems to me. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very difficult. That's why I say, you hear Congressman Windbag or Senator Windbag getting up and giving a speech, or a presidential candidate Windbag giving up and giving a speech and pandering to you to try to get your vote. Tell them no. No mas. Throw in the towel. Because you've got to change it. Yes, sir.
I think one of the major problems among older people who are receiving Social Security benefits, so one of the major problems among older people receiving these benefits is the vast majority of them truly believe they paid for them. They truly believe that, in my opinion. But that's not true. I understand that on Medicare, for every dollar that older people put in, they get $3 out, as an example. So my question is, how do you get a situation where the older generation understands that they haven't paid for all of these benefits that they've received, and maybe if they understood that, they would be willing to compromise more?
Ooh, I don't know. I really don't.
Well, do you think my assumption's correct?
Your assumption is 100% correct. 100% correct. Keep your cotton-picking hands off my Medicare and Social Security. I said, wait a minute, it's federal law, for God's sakes. It's if we had kept our cotton-picking hands on it after the Second World War, it'd be a relatively small transfer program. So we've been changing it, and you're right. Look, I think Social Security is a phenomenal intergenerational program. It has broad support across all generations. This isn't a program that has marginal support or just support for people over the age of 65. It's broad intergenerational support, which is what allows it to remain in place. Every now and then somebody will propose privatizing Social Security, and they get run out of town. And the reason is because of this intergenerational support. Medicare is the same way. It has very strong intergenerational support, in part because young people understand that maybe they're going to live forever, but they'll understand that once you get over the age of 65, because you see it in their parents, they're visiting the doctor more often than they saw before. Your body starts to break down. In both cases, I think there's strong intergenerational support. That all the more reason, particularly for the baby boom generation, all the more reason for those who are almost certain to get all the benefits that they've been promised, all the more reason for them to step forward and say, we got to make certain that the next generation gets what we got, which is a security knowing that program is going to be there for them. And right now, you cannot make that claim. You cannot make the claim that for people who are under the age of 30, that Medicare and Social Security is going to be at the same level, anywhere near at the same level that it currently is. But they're going to be, what you can promise them is they're going to be paying for it for the next 35 years.
But my basic point, though, is if people understood, older people,
Right.
Would that create a situation where they might have a different attitude towards compromise? Because
Yes, it would.
I'm an old guy, and the people I talk to, the vast majority of them, truly believe. They truly believe.
You used to be an old guy in my eyes. Now you look like a pretty young fellow to me.
But they believe they paid for their benefits. And
I know,
they don't
it's a problem.
Yeah.
It's a problem. Look, this problem is going to be much harder to solve as a consequence of the financial meltdown. You had his entire year's GDP wiped out in 2008 in net worth. 401ks got obliterated, the value of housing as well. So there's so much more insecurity today in the country on this question. So my own view of the matter is, by the way, Social Security is a relatively small problem. It's not that difficult to solve. Medicare is hard. And Medicare, in my view, let me put it this way. There are 4 significant federal laws. These are laws. This is not, they didn't come, from outer space. There are laws on the books. And most of us, I'd say 99% of us obey the law. And these laws are powerful. The first one says, if you get blown up in a war, you're eligible for the rest of your life. That's me. I got a claim on all your incomes. Under federal law, I got a claim on your incomes. And I have since 1969. By the way, I go to a private prosthetist. I told a friend of mine in New York I was going to my prosthetist, and a couple days later she said to me, "Does your wife know you?" I said, "No." Is that what you thought too? No, I don't go to hookers. I was getting a leg fix. So, it's a private company. But I have a claim on your income, and I get passionate about it because, I can't give you the number of families that I've visited since I gotten into politics who've suffered a trauma. They have a son or daughter who needs a prosthetic device. This thing costs $15,000. They don't have insurance, or their insurance company doesn't cover it. And I sit with them and say, I get a claim on their income, and they got no claim on mine. What the hell is wrong with this picture? And the problem is, the federal law says you got to get blown up. And by the way, in this decade, there's been a lot of people signing up to get blown up because they knew they were going to get health care as a consequence, right? The second one, federal law. It creates a program. It amended the Social Security Act in 1965 to create Medicare and Medicaid. Two more federal provisions. One, Medicaid. If you're poor, you're eligible. But you got to promise to stay poor, because the minute you're not poor anymore, you're no longer eligible. What the hell is that all about? Well, it was a generous thing, and I challenge you, if anybody tries to explain how Medicaid works, it is shockingly complicated, right? And it's painful. When you're down at street level with working people that get Medicaid, and they're facing cutbacks in dental care, for example. I mean, people presume because I was the United States Senator, they got above average intelligence. It's a wrong presumption. But if I was missing 2 front teeth, you'd presume my IQ was 30 points lower. And I'd have a hell of a time getting a job as a consequence. So that's Medicaid. Medicare, if you're 65, you're eligible. 10 quarters of work and you're eligible. That's federal law. Oh, by the way, the kidneys are covered under Medicare. We got 1 organ in. You don't have to prove anything on the renal dialysis program. That's federal law. All we have to do is keep adding organ. Add 1 organ a year, that's what I would say. It's a simple program, no means test required, no proof of eligibility. You just got a kidney that needs dialysis. And the fourth one is, under federal law now, you work for the right boss. And by the way, the marketplace, which I love, is ensuring fewer and fewer number of people. That's what the market's doing. So anytime Senator Windbag gets up and proposes a market-based solution, you say, well, how's the market working now? Why do you believe that more market forces are going to make it better? It's making it worse. More and more people on Medicaid, more and more people getting their health care through the National Guard or some other service. So now I got employers. The federal government, state of Nebraska, state of New Hampshire, city of Concord, any employer that where you produce enough you can get a deductibility and an offset on FICA, they're all subsidized. So the fourth category is you got to work for the right employer. And what I think you have to start, if you're going to get this right, you have to start with a simple presumption. We have 308 million American citizens and legal residents. We'll draw the string tighter so it's just legal residents and American citizens. That's the group. That's the group. That's how you prove that you're eligible. If you can prove you're an American citizen or legal resident, you're in that group. Now, to go from that point to the next step, those of us who have a lot of income We may have to give up a little bit of our VA benefits. Maybe we got to pay a little more. I don't know. But create one big group. The last thing I say, I apologize for going on a rant about this. Everybody who was with me in '92 knows that I have a capability of doing this. So I could go to the VA hospital. I don't. I could go on Medicare. I don't. I still work. I have employer insurance. I don't. My insurance is Federal Employee Health Benefit Program. And my premiums are relatively low, and I pay full premium. My premiums are relatively low in part because there's a little bit of subsidy, and the biggest reason is it's a big group. And about half of them are under the age of 30. And except for having babies, which has gotten pretty damn expensive since I had 2 kids, except they don't go to the doctor. So my rates are lower. Imagine if you were in a group that had 308 million people in it. Then instead of screwing people that are under the age of 30, they'd all be in. You can't get there without doing that, in my view. You can't make the changes in Medicare. They're politically impossible. I know what they are. It's a finite list. You never expect Congress is going to make the changes in Medicare. It's too cruel to make the changes if all you do is try to preserve Medicare as an intact program. Yes, sir.
And one of the most discouraging things to me is the inability of Congress to get anything done. It struck me when the super committee was named that before the people were picked, that if Pelosi and Reid had appointed the Republicans, and Boehner and
great idea.
Had appointed the Democrats, the question is, had that been done, are there enough reasonable people in Congress to have made some progress?
Oh, it's a very good question. Should I repeat it for the cameras? I mean, the question is, what would have happened if Boehner had appointed the Democrats to the super committee and Reid and Pelosi had appointed the Republicans? Look, they came pretty close as it was. They came pretty close to getting the votes. I mean, Dick Durbin, Tom Coburn, voted for the darn thing. It was, they were, I think, 2 votes short of getting the number that they needed. So I would say unarguably yes. If the selections had been made based on people who have an interest in the subject matter, the selection was made based upon people who they thought would sort of cast a reliable Republican or Democratic vote, because they're afraid of the consequences. I understand that. I was very sympathetic. And by the way, I do think President Obama made a mistake not putting it in his State of the Union. It was his debt commission. They reported to him. And I think it would have been far but easy to sit on the sidelines and criticize any president, which I love doing. But, yeah.
Yes. Back in 2004, I was at the UW-Madison, and Howard Dean came, and someone in the crowd asked, well, the country's so messed up. What can we do about it, all us then 18, 19, 20-year-olds? And he said, work hard, stay politically active, and vote. Well, I did that for 8 years, and, well, speaking as one of the few under 30s in the room, I don't think it's been working. And you talk about all of these problems we need to solve, and I think, well, I'm a young guy, hardworking, a lot of time ahead of me. What can I do? What can people in my generation do that actually changes things? Because, as I'm certain you've heard on the news, Wisconsin has turned into a battlefield since I left. And all of my friends have lost all their benefits. They've all been fired. A bunch of them have been arrested because in Madison now it's illegal to have groups of 4 or larger on the street so that they can't protest, and they just wanted to go get a beer. And it just, so much of my generation feels disempowered and disenfranchised because we don't have the money, and we don't have the connections, and we don't have the experience that it seems like we need to have our voices heard. I'm just curious what you think I should do.
Well, I mean, first of all, I would recommend not getting life advice from anybody in politics. I mean, well, look, I mean, first of all, young people, if you go to Washington, D.C., have you ever been to Washington? If you go to, I can take you on a tour of as many offices as you and I can stand to go into, and you'll be hard-pressed to find very many people over the age of 30. Young people run our country. You don't think Senator Blowhard knows what the hell he's doing. It's his staff. giving him answers all the time. Because he's too busy. He or she's stretched. Young people rule. And I said earlier in campaigns that the same is true. It's understandable on the same time that a relatively small number of people your age vote. There's a couple. I mean, I didn't take a great deal of interest in politics until much later. If you're over the age of 65, you don't have to be told that the election is critical for your health and safety, because Medicare and Social Security are clear and present issues for you. They oftentimes determine whether or not you're able to survive. So what people do with those programs matter, and as a consequence, the voting percentages are much higher. So I would say my advice, now that I've given you advice of don't take advice from people in politics, I mean, I persevere. I think you're right. I mean, the American political system, the only significant hope I've got is the energy, the idea, and values of people under the age of 30. It's because I think like it or not, you're going to be running the damn place pretty soon, and you know, politics can be enormous. Politics and life in general can be phenomenally frustrating, because no victory is ever guaranteed, and even if you win, you can feel like you've lost. So one of the hardest things in life is to have to decide, you know, are these losses going to accumulate and cause me to become a grumpy old man and a cynic? And I hope that doesn't happen to you. I mean, God knows there's plenty. If you're up in Wisconsin, you get plenty of evidence for that to happen. I hope it doesn't.
Can I just add one thing? I think one of the challenges for people of your age, it's a huge challenge, is to create a sense of community where you live and in the country you are, outside of technology.
See you, Will.
And I think back, you know, my parents both gone now. Let me back up. Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote a book called Wait Till Next Year. It was my childhood she was writing about. And this is a line in the book I most remember because it captured the 1950s. She said, "I knew the inside of my neighbors' houses so well. I could have walked through them in the pitch dark and not run into a stick of furniture. Today, people don't know the people across the street." If you want to move the country, if you want to change the country, knock on your neighbor's door. Put your cell phone down, your computer away. Come out of the basement and get involved in real life. That's how things happen. We don't change problems by merely circulating data. We change problems by getting engaged. And there are people, African American people, one of whom is going to be our commencement speaker this year, John Lewis. He was fighting civil rights for decades. I had the privilege a couple of years ago to be in Washington, D.C., and the Dalai Lama spoke. And he was getting an award from Melantos Foundation, Melantos Prize. And Katrina Lantos Sweat lives in New Hampshire. She was here earlier. This is an amazing story about perseverance. And she said the Dalai Lama was in the House office, my father's office, Tom Lantos, and he was talking about the fact that he hadn't been in Tibet. He was living in India. And so Katrina said, I started getting really angry in all the years he'd been away, the decades he'd been away. And she said, he reached over and he touched my arm and he said, Katrina, we're making progress. Be patient. That's called wisdom. So respectfully, that should have been fighting for 8 years, good for you. How about fighting for another 25 years to make it right? That's the answer to the problem. That's the answer to the problem. Nothing gets better in 8 years.
Thank you. If I could turn back to an issue that's front and center for the Concord Coalition, which is this is the sustainability issue, and then tie that into the New Hampshire primary, which ostensibly is designed to smoke out politicians and have them address issues. We had a very disappointing experience in this last primary. Not long after both of those commission reports, Simpson-Bowles and Domenici-Rivlin reports came out, we began to see the candidates regularly. I thought, what an opportunity for us to press the candidates on that issue. But in the end, nobody did. And they got away with, I think, something they shouldn't have gotten away with by not addressing that issue. There was only one candidate who actually let Simpson-Bowles cross his lips, and that was John Huntsman. The others were never pressed and never volunteered. Is there anything to be learned from that if we're going to continue to exercise the responsibility that we have for the New Hampshire primary?
Well, I would say yes. I mean, first of all, I share your feeling about it. It was a tremendous opportunity lost. It was a tremendous loss because people were talking about it. They were talking about solutions in ways they hadn't talked about before. All across the country, people were writing about it. Conversations were going on about we've got two sort of generalized blueprints been laid out for us, and we kind of see what we have to do. And it disappeared. So, like lots of opportunities that are lost, I mean, we can't be discouraged by them. We got to. This one is inevitable. It's not going to go away. The baby boomers didn't have as many children as their parents thought they were going to have. It's a demographic problem that will not go away. You cannot ignore it forever. You can't. I was hopeful that, but when Simpson and Bowles put their report out, and when Domenici and Rivlin did as well, that something would happen. It didn't. But it doesn't mean it doesn't have to happen. It's going to have to happen again. I'm sure John's view. I think the American people are smart on this issue. I think they know that if you're spending at 25% of GDP and taxing it at 15% of GDP, that it's relatively easy to figure out what to do. You got to cut on one side and increase taxes on the other. And I think the tax debate's actually right now pretty healthy. I'm still hopeful that though we've lost an opportunity on this, that we'll come back and find the opportunity again to take it up. I'll just emphasize again on health care. I do not believe that you can do what you have to do on Medicare as an intact program. It is way too cruel to beneficiaries to impose upon them what you would have to impose if that's all you do. Just take Medicare all by itself. Medicare and Medicaid is just as cruel in my view. So some substantial change is going to have to occur in federal law and health care in order to get the problem solved.
It strikes me that an awful lot of the issues that we're talking about are very complex. And it seems to me that we have very low tolerance for complexity in our public discourse right now, which is not helped by the media, which allows either non sequiturs or outright lies to essentially go unchallenged, so that people begin to believe that, in fact, that's a correct answer to a question. So, and I feel very frustrated about that aspect of things, and I'm trying to figure out, what are the things that we might do to begin to change that aspect of things so that we can tolerate a complex conversation, hold more than two ideas in our head at one time, and how do we hold the media accountable for, much more accurate and much more aggressive questioning on this stuff? Well,
my first advice would be watch Jon Stewart more, because he's the only one that seems to be holding the media accountable to a standard of honesty. My own sense of this is that these technologies, we're now down to 120 characters in tweets. It's become a dominant technology in this debate, in this campaign. It's forming public opinion. Most tweeted messages coming off of debates before the debate's over. 120 characters describing the sum and substance of a 2-hour conversation with 5 people. It's pretty remarkable. At the same time, if you've got the time and the tolerance for it, the technology allows you to do much deeper research than you could ever do before about what the candidates actually think, what they believe, what the issues are. And it imposes upon us as citizens a much greater burden of, there was a time when we could say, it's too complex, I don't have access to the information. You cannot use that excuse anymore, because there is access to the information. It can get complicated and confusing, but there isn't much that we can't find out about what's going on these issues if we're willing to take the time to do it. But The challenge there, in my view, just one person speaking, is that I've got so much information now I can't figure out whether I'm going forward or backwards half the time. So I just get, it'd be, what did Rick Perry call it, a brain freeze or whatever the hell it is. You do get these moments when you kind of shut down. So I would say it's a real problem, because the debate's becoming, as Neil Postman said in his book in the early 90s, I believe, we feel like we're amusing ourselves to death. We don't have the time or the patience to listen to a longer presentation. I mean, Gingrich is talking about the Lincoln-Douglas debates. I mean, my God, who would sit through an hour-and-a-half presentation from somebody, and then have the other guy go for an hour and a half, then take an hour break and come back for an hour rebuttal by each guy? I mean, if you're not done in 10 minutes, I hardly have time for it. So we are, again, the audience, I think, we tend to force these things into smaller capsules. But I do think that technologies are changing things. They give us much better access to what actually is going on than waiting for some official, either in a campaign or the government, to tell us what it is. But it's a heck of a lot harder than it was before.
I just wanted to add one thing, and I suppose it's New Hampshire because it's more possible. There was a time, I think, where a fair comment was, well, you should vote. A lot of people don't vote, by the way. A lot of people are outraged about what's happening, don't bother to vote. So, but maybe the next step is run for office. I don't know how you feel, but I don't think the principal issue confronting New Hampshire is whether we should have guns on college campuses with drugs and alcohol. But that seems to be sucking up a lot of oxygen here. I can't change that. I can't change it unless I'm an informed voter, or unless I choose to run for public office. And it may be getting to that point where the sideline, even with the vote, is not enough. The people need to stand up. I mean, it's no more their country than yours. I just think we have fallen in love, and technology has changed in the world. We see that all across the globe, and that's good. But it's suddenly becoming a substitute for engagement.
On the other hand, on the way over here from Exeter, as Aaron and Karen were telling me about UNH Law School, they told me that it used to be called Franklin Pierce. I didn't know who the hell Franklin Pierce was. But I know who he is now, thanks to Google and my cell phone. I sound like a Franklin Pierce expert today as a consequence of reading him on my cell phone on the way over here. So and that's not the only amount of information you can get. I mean, it's harder. I'm not pessimistic when it comes to the negative impact on technology. There's plenty of examples of its negative impact, its pernicious impact, its trivialization. But I think there's plenty of examples as well where it's given us lots more sources. I mean, I can get nostalgic about the good old days when we had 3 broadcasters on the networks, with the whole family gather at 6 and 10 o'clock to find out what's going on in the world. I can get nostalgic about that, but I was heavily dependent upon their point of view, heavily dependent upon what they decided they wanted to cover. I have no such dependency today. And as a consequence, the networks are having a harder and harder time getting viewing audiences. So I think the technology could kill us. I mean, the Neil Postman's example was, if you've got a hoe and you're a farmer and you use that hoe for 40 years, your back's going to curve. So it's going to have an impact on us. It's not neutral. It will unquestionably have an impact unless we resist it and figure out how to use it differently.
So we're out of time. We can take one last question here in the middle. Go ahead.
Well, as a fellow 68-year-old,
We're all
slightly, and talk to us about the Republican primary from an insider's perspective, and if you're willing to do that, maybe even talk about the general election and who you might think might win.
Well, I mean, I think I said earlier, I'm a Democrat, so I found the Republican primary to be great fun. But it's I'm also. I pay attention to these debates. I mean, I haven't watched all of them, but I've watched a fair number of them. I mean, it's kind of sad in a way that I do, but I've watched them, and I think you're seeing a really interesting presentation, a really constructive presentation by mostly very intelligent people. So and you're getting a view of the world. I disagree with some of those views, but you're getting a view of the world from them. And you know, take a guy like Ron Paul. I mean, Ron Paul, you can disagree with everything he said, but you cannot accuse him of being inconsistent. And it's a good thing to watch a guy who spent the last 40 years basically saying the same thing over and over and over, who hasn't modified. I don't mean that he's like a Neanderthal or something, but I mean he's stayed consistent. He's not performing to the audience. It's pretty inspiring in that way. And I agree with what John said about Rick Santorum. You know, so, and then, you know, the money thing we've already talked about. Gingrich went from 41% to 13% in Iowa in a single week. And that wasn't because he stubbed his toe. It was $12 million spent in Iowa, and that's real money in Iowa. In a single week, all outside money. They crushed him. It was a little, you know, I had to sort of smile when he said, God, politics has gotten negative. Where'd that come from? So, hello? You know, you might want to check the mirror the next time you're complaining. And the country's very divided. I mean, I sort of expect it's going to be probably 45-10, with 10% of the public deciding who the next president's going to be. I think the primaries made it more likely, and the economy's made it more likely that it's President Obama. And by the way, I think he's got a pretty strong case to make. But the country's very divided. I mean, we'll either have Barack Obama for 4 more years, or we'll get a Republican. I mean, it could be either one.
Thank you very much. And with just a little token from UNH Law.
Oh, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
Not Franklin Pierce. I know about... Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
No, that was fabulous. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.